Welcome to a special episode of our podcast, where we're delving into the horror classic that defined a genre. Today, we're shining a spotlight on Friday the 13th, a film that sent shockwaves through the world of cinema and made an indelible mark on the horror genre. Join us as we journey through the dark and ominous Camp Crystal Lake, a place where terror knows no bounds. From its eerie prologue in 1958 to the chilling events of the present day, we'll peel back the layers of suspense, fear, and the iconic horrors that await. Let's begin. In a brief prologue set in 1958, the setting was Camp Crystal Lake. The night was alive with the flicker of a campfire, and the sounds of laughter filled the air. Two young summer camp counselors, Barry and Claudette, sneaked away from the warmth of the flames for a more intimate encounter. The sparks of romance lit their way, but before they could shed their inhibitions and clothes, an unseen assailant slipped into the room. The deadly shadow moved with a sinister purpose, and the following moment was shrouded in screams and darkness. Barry and Claudette's lives were abruptly extinguished, marking the campfire's final glow. Fast forward to the present, on a chilling Friday the 13th in June. In a nearby diner, a young woman named Annie, a stranger to the area, entered. Her question about directions to Camp Crystal Lake was met with shock and trepidation from the patrons and staff alike. The legend of the camp's dark history still loomed large. A peculiar old man named Ralph, whose ominous words seemed guided by foresight, warned Annie that they were all doomed. Enos, a kind truck driver, offered to take her halfway to the camp. During the drive, he shared grim stories about the camp, including the tragic drowning of a young boy in Crystal Lake in 1957, just a year before the horrifying double murder. Annie's journey took a terrifying turn when, after leaving the truck, she hitched a ride with an unknown driver in a Jeep. Fear began to gnaw at her as the driver sped past the camp's entrance, refusing to stop. Annie made a daring escape, leaping from the moving vehicle, fleeing into the unforgiving woods. Her pursuer, the unseen driver, ultimately caught up with her and ended her life with a cruel final slash of a Bowie knife. At the camp, a group of counselors, Ned, Jack, Bill, Marcy, Alice, and Brenda, were hard at work renovating cabins and facilities under the watchful eye of the camp's owner, Steve Christie. Strange incidents unfolded around them, including a prank that mimicked drowning and a visit from the local police. But the supernatural seemed to have taken hold of Camp Crystal Lake. A large snake was severed in two by a machete, and Ralph's eerie warnings persisted. As a fierce storm loomed on the horizon, Steve left the campgrounds in search of supplies, unknowingly sealing his own fate. Unseen and unnoticed, the relentless killer, concealed beneath a hooded black rain slicker, began to hunt down the counselors one by one. Ned spotted the mysterious figure entering a cabin and decided to investigate, leading him to a deadly confrontation. As the storm raged outside, Marcy and Jack found shelter in a cabin, their passionate encounter unaware of the sinister presence overhead. Marcy, leaving to visit the restroom, heard a chilling sound by the showers and encountered the masked murderer, who wielded a felling axe with lethal intent. Meanwhile, Bill, Alice, and Brenda engaged in a daring game of strip Monopoly in Alice's cabin. But the rain interrupted their fun, reminding Brenda that she left her cabin windows open. Alone in her cabin, Brenda heard a faint, childlike cry for help from the woods. Her flashlight led her to the archery range, where blinding lights obscured her vision, and the hooded killer struck in the shadows. Bill and Alice rushed to investigate Brenda's scream, but found only a gruesome scene, a bloody axe in Brenda's bed. As they combed the camp for answers, they realized the phone lines had been cut, and their cars refused to start. Steve's return to the camp turned into a nightmare as his Jeep got stuck in the mud. A helpful police officer dropped him off partway, but as Steve walked back to the camp alone, he met his doom at the hands of an assailant he seemed to recognize. With the camp plunged into darkness, Bill attempted to fix the generator, unaware of the horrors lurking in the shadows. When he failed to return, Alice ventured to the generator cabin, only to discover Bill's lifeless body, impaled by arrows. Alone and in fear, Alice sought refuge in the main cabin, but Brenda's lifeless body was thrown through a window, a horrifying message from their unseen assailant. Panic set in as Alice heard a vehicle approach, hoping it was Steve's return. Instead, she encountered Mrs. Voorhees, a middle-aged woman who claimed to be an old friend of the Christies. However, the truth was far more sinister. Mrs. Voorhees revealed herself to be the mother of the drowned boy from 1957, blaming her son's death on the negligence of the camp counselors. As the day marked Jason's birthday, Alice grew anxious about Steve's absence. Suddenly, Mrs. Voorhees' demeanor shifted, and she brandished a Bowie knife, confirming her identity as the killer. Desperate, and with no other option, Alice defended herself with a fireplace poker, temporarily incapacitating Mrs. Voorhees. A relentless pursuit ensued, with Mrs. Voorhees speaking in a haunting voice that resembled her son's. The chase took them all over the camp, and Alice realized her life hung in the balance. Their confrontation ended in a storage shed, where Alice discovered a rifle. She barely had time to load it before Mrs. Voorhees burst in, armed with a machete. Alice struck a blow with a frying pan, rendering her attacker unconscious, or so she thought. Rushing out to the shore of the lake, Alice sat down, her mind clouded with shock. But Mrs. Voorhees, driven by madness, attacked once more with a machete. Alice barely evaded the deadly weapon, and a fierce struggle unfolded at the water's edge. In the end, it was Alice who prevailed, decapitating Mrs. Voorhees in a desperate bid for survival. Exhausted and traumatized, Alice took a canoe out to the center of the lake and fell asleep. Morning came and the police arrived, calling out to her. She woke, her rescue finally at hand, only to be thrust into one last nightmare. As the officers approached, the water's surface erupted. The decomposing body of Jason, the boy who drowned in 1957, dragged Alice under the water, her desperate screams silenced beneath the surface. In the end, Alice's ordeal had left her in a hospital, where a police officer delivered the grim news that everyone at the camp was dead. When she inquired about Jason, the officer informed her that they had found no sign of a boy. Alice's reply was haunting. "Then he's still there," as the lake shimmered peacefully in the morning light. That wraps up our special episode on Friday the 13th. We hope you've enjoyed this deep dive into the world of horror and the legacy of Camp Crystal Lake. If you liked what you heard, don't forget to subscribe, like, and leave us a comment. Stay tuned for more thrilling stories and episodes in the future.